yesterday's news.
Hello and welcome to Old News, the programme and podcast which looks at news of today through the papers of yesterday. Some quite a long way back. This week, floods and flooding not far from the news at the moment, it has to be said, as we've got into that time of year where the drains are all blocked with leaves and you get heavy rain, and before you know it, there are floods one place or another. A lot of people might think it's a modern phenomenon, global warming and the likes. It might be the case. However, a quick delve into the archives of the papers shows that flooding has been a serious issue on the Isle of Man for more years than you might care to remember, and some very serious ones. I could only select a few. Let's take a look at the Isle of Man Times, Saturday, December the 28th, 1901. The floods of the 18th of October and the 12th and 13th of November, two such heavy floods as those of the 18th of October and 12th and 13th of Nov have rarely followed each other at so short an interval. The first flood is said to have been the heaviest for 29 years, and the second was scarcely, if at all, less heavy. And yet in the first flood, the rainfall was comparatively small and fell in a few hours. And in the second, the rainfall was extraordinarily large and lasted for many hours. The comparative amounts of rain will be seen from the following figures. At Ingebrek, 1.78 inches of rain fell during the first flood and 3.82 inches during the second. The corresponding figures of the Clips reservoir were 0.85 and 4.68 inches. At Cronkburn, 9.93 and 4.21 inches. In Douglas, brackets Woodville, 0.92 and 3.31 inches, and at Santon Vicarage 1.61 and 2.57 inches. And during the second flood, the extraordinary rainfall of 5.68 inches, almost 6 inches of rain, fell at St Luke's Parsonage in Baldwin. How then, the writer says, are we to account for the floods being similar in amount? I think I shall have no difficulty in showing that the earlier flood was probably mainly caused by a cloud burst or bursts. In the first place, the rainfall on the 18th of October varied greatly in different parts of the island. Thus, at the Point of Ayre, where the average rainfall is not more than half that in Douglas, 1.3 inches fell, whereas in Douglas only 0.9 inches were recorded. And Cronkburn having 0.93 inches and the Clips 0.85 inches, while Santon Vicarage had 1.61 inches. Cloudbursts, yes, that might account for the great snow which hit just a small part of the island in 2013 maybe. The Ramsey Courier, Friday, March the 4th in 1910. Disastrous floods, we are told. Heavy floods of a disastrous nature have visited the island during the week. The country about Ramsey and the north has never, it is stated, been in such a state, and agriculturalists fear that unless the drying March winds present themselves very soon, the sowing season will be kept back. Wednesday night saw the heaviest downfall of rain that has been experienced for many a year, and next morning hundreds of acres of land were submerged, the depth of water in places being several feet. Thus the land, unless very favourable weather intervenes, is likely to remain waterlogged for a considerable time. Sulby River rose, it is estimated, about 7 feet, and at various places entered farmhouses and residences, including Mr. J. G. Elliott's house at Lazaire, and also Lochany Yee House. It being the lambing season, the floods have been particularly oppressive for the sheep, and it's feared a number of sheep and lambs have suffered, the bodies of a few being washed down the river on Thursday. On the railway line, Lochany Lee Bridge was overwhelmed, wherever that might be. But the company, since the last severe flood which dislocated the traffic on the lines, have constructed culverts at various parts, and these avoid the line being blocked. And then we skip forward to 1930, which appeared to be a disastrously bad flood by all accounts. The Isle of Man Examiner, Friday, September the 19th, 1930. Island swept by storm and flood. A terrible trail of damage and desolation, we are told. Bridges torn up, walls and roadways swept away, farmers' serious losses, crops totally destroyed, sheep, pigs and poultry perishing in the flood, and also some miraculous escapes from flooded houses. with amazing experiences and thrilling rescues, we are told. The estimated damage, which might date it somewhat, £100,000. In the body of the article, which goes on for several pages, we're told the worst floods for a century occurred in the Isle of Man in the early hours of a Thursday morning after a terrific storm which had raged all night. Bridges were swept away, vessels were carried from their moorings at Castletown, a fishing boat was driven ashore at Peel, houses were flooded to such an extent that some of the occupants had to escape through windows. Roads were blocked with debris and the railway services were disorganised. The damage to the corn crop is almost incalculable, we were told. Farmers also suffered heavily by the drowning of a great number of sheep, pigs and poultry. The deluge at Ramsey was terrific and amazing. A total of 4 3/8 inches of rain was recorded in just 2 hours. At Douglas, the night's fall for 24 hours, including Wednesday night and Thursday morning, was 2 3/4 inches. Pulrose Park, we are told, was marooned. The floods in the neighbourhood of Douglas were in the worst in living memory. Around 3 a.m, the torrent rolling through Portashee burst its banks and swept across the meadow, striking the stone wall along the Peel Road and levelling it for a length of almost 30 yards. The water had not spent its force when it reached the wall on the other side of the road, and about 15 yards of the wall there was demolished. The ballast was torn off the railway line at this point, and for a time the line itself was like a mill race. The river overflowed between the Quarterbridge Hotel, flooding the cellar there to a depth of 4 feet, and sweeping through Bellevue, carrying away the bridge which gave access to Pulrose Park from Peel Road. The whole structure of concrete pillars, carriageway and iron railings completely disappeared, and with it went a gas main and a water main. Pulrose Park, a town in itself, was thus practically marooned. Those who wanted to get to Douglas were compelled to make a detour through the meadows to the main road above Spring Valley. The children could not get to school, nor indeed did they want to, when there were so many exciting things happening. Don't know about exciting, sounds downright terrifying. The floods washed out the ballast in the railway track at the Bellevue crossing, and the low-lying meadows right down to Douglas railway station were underwater for quite some considerable time. Elsewhere we're told the floods at Ballasalla were the heaviest in living memory. The water burst out at the top of Douglas Road and came pouring like a broad river from the village, flooding all the houses around the post office and between Mr. Joyce's house adjoining the cattle mart and the railway station, many of them to a depth of 3 feet. Extensive flooding at Castletown, where the raging waters of the swollen Saltburn River wrought havoc when it reached Castletown. The hedge of a cornfield belonging to Mr. R.T. Neen was flung down, and several cartloads of stoops of oats were carried into Pulson Park, the greater part of which was now under water. And at Rushen Abbey, a scene of destruction was also presented. The waters had invaded the building from all sides, filling the cellars, setting barrels of wine, cases of whisky and bottles of ale all afloat, as well as even heavy articles of furniture. Sounds like whisky galore, doesn't it? Mrs. Whittam, the wife of the licensee, said she was awakened by the roar of the flood and then heard the crash of the falling bridge. On going downstairs, she found herself knee-deep in water. Everything was soaked, she says, even the contents of the safe. At this moment, she said, Mr. Whittam is upstairs trying to dry £1 notes on a hot water bottle. I hope he is successful with that. The famous statue of a Greek goddess, which stood in front of the hotel, that's the Rushen Abbey, and which figured in thousands of holiday photographs over the years, was carried away and flung into the riverbank a couple of 100 yards away. Great holes were torn in the roadway, and the ornamental railings were smashed to matchwood. As I say, there's reams of copy on that. The whole island, it seems, was badly damaged. Not content with that, if your memory goes back that far, very much the same thing happened the following year, 1931. The Ramsey Courier, Friday, November the 27th of that year. Severe floods damage at Glen Alden and Ballure Glen. Roads impassable, houses flooded. Damage to property and land. Landslides and widespread flooding were caused in many parts of the north of the Isle of Man as a result of Monday's torrential rain. The deluge could hardly be described as a rainstorm. It was not of comparatively short duration, as was the case in September 1930, but the rain simply teemed down all day on Monday without the slightest break of any kind. The river beds and banks, still unrepaired following the great floods of 1930, were unable to cope with the abnormal volume of water, and the water overflowed the banks in many parts and flooded the surrounding land. So far the damage to property was concerned, Glen Alden was again the worst sufferer, and this renowned beauty spot on Tuesday presented a rain-soaked and desolate appearance. And it goes on to say, although it is over a year since the catastrophe occurred in the glen which caused such great damage, steps are only being taken now to make a recurrence of that disaster less likely. Over a year has been spent in talking and arguing about the subject, and the danger to the Glen residents is as great today as it was 12 months ago. 1931. People in Laxey might think we didn't learn a great deal from that, it would seem. And just to finish off, train services interrupted as well. Obstructions occurred at the railway line at Milltown and Pulrose. This again was 1931. At Milltown, the riverbank gave way and the river burst its course just above the railway bridge, resulting in a subsidiary river swamping the line and scouring the ballast away for a short distance. Repair work was put into hand at once, and the normal train services were resumed within a short time. In the meantime, passengers and mails and parcels were conveyed by bus. There was no interruption of the bus service, nor on the Manx electric railway system. Have we learnt anything over the years? Well, I'll leave that for you, dear listener, to decide. Suffice to say, floods in 1901 or 1930 or 1931 or 2023, it's all old news. Cheerio.
You're gonna be yesterday's news.